going on YouTube? Jack's here, and I'm coming to you from a very exciting place. This is my new office in my new house. Yes, over what is spring break for most teachers, we moved, and so I'm in the process of getting everything set up. And in other exciting news, I'm shooting this on a new camera, new microphone, new everything. So I'll do a rundown of that in another video, probably the next video. But I wanted to bring you this video. I was at Caffeine and Octane the other weekend, and I shot a bunch of footage on my phone in sort of an ironic twist to show you that you don't necessarily need to spend a bunch of money to get decent footage for a YouTube channel, that you could run an entire YouTube channel off of your phone. So I went over a couple basic things that you could do if you are into the car motorcycle culture and you have a decent phone that would maximize the potential of your phone and hopefully get you started on a YouTube channel. So here are some tips from past me at Caffeine and Octane, walking around with nothing but a phone. So one of the first tips you want to pay attention to is available lights. I got here, this is Caffeine and Octane. I got here a little bit early. It was a little bit darker. Cell phones have small sensors, so they don't perform very well in the dark. So if you want to shoot primarily on your phone, you want to shoot in available light that is good enough for the phone. But also keep in mind how that might affect the phone's shutter speed based on the frame rate you're shooting in. And I'll talk more about that in a second. One of the things you can do is you can lock your exposure by holding down on the exposure, screen. When you touch the screen, it auto focuses and does exposure. If you hold down on that, you can manually set your exposure. Now on a phone, you don't want to underexpose too much, but I definitely recommend trying to underexpose a little bit so that it doesn't blow out all of the highlights in the image, such as the sky behind me. Phones can't handle a wide dynamic range, especially in the native app. So you want to make sure that you underexpose slightly if you have your focus correct. That way the highlights look good, or as good as possible. One of the best aspects of shooting on a phone though is the relatively wide lens. You get a large field of view behind you. I'm just holding the iPhone right now in my hand, and you can see pretty much everything around me. Also, phones tend to have pretty decent stability, and you don't need some type of stabilizer or a Joby Gorilla Pod or something like that. You can just hold your phone out in front of you. On top of that, phones are sort of optimized to pick up voices, right? That's what phones do. So even though I don't have a mic on it right now, and it's not the best audio in the world, I've got a truck coming in behind me, and you can still hear my voice relatively clearly, especially compared to some on-camera mics you might find in a cheap Canon or Lumix or Sony. If you really want to hide the fact that you're shooting on a phone, you need to think about frame rate and shutter speed. Frame rate is how many frames of film you see in a second, and the shutter speed is how many times the shutter opens and closes. Typically, the shutter speed is double the frame rate for the most cinematic footage. But phones won't do this. Phones will up the shutter speed in order to control the amount of light entering the sensor. So you need to think about that when you're filming, because the higher your shutter speed, the sort of weirder and more crisp the action looks. And if the shutter speed is too high, it looks kind of like home video. So what are some ways that you can compensate for this when you're shooting a vlog or B-roll on your phone? Well, there's not much you can do about it if you're just vlogging like this, because the shutter speed, you can't control it in the standard iPhone app. However, phones tend to have pretty decent stability. When you're shooting B-roll or you're shooting shots of cars, you can actually shoot at a higher frame rate at the iPhone 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second, even up to 240. I would recommend sticking with about 120.
Decent stability.
And then you could slow that footage down. If you slow that footage down, the higher shutter speed will actually help the slow motion footage look better rather than look weird and crispy. Now, if you're shooting at regular speed like this,
Stability.
there's not much you could do about it, but I can promise you most people won't mind the way your vlog footage looks if you have some nice crispy B-roll footage. Another thing you have to consider is that phones will auto white balance, and the data rate coming out of them is not high enough that you want to do a whole bunch of color correction and stuff like that. If you watch some awesome YouTubers and they're really cinematic looking videos, they're probably adding a lot of color correction, color tweaking, lookup tables, LUTs to their footage. And it makes it look really nice and cinematic, but phone data rates aren't high enough. You start playing with the footage like that and you can get some weird artifacts like banding and
weird little blocky color shifts and stuff like that. And you want to avoid that whenever possible because it'll make your footage look terrible. So think about the data rate and think about how much can you correct this footage without messing it up. You don't have a lot of room to work with, so you want to make it look nice as you're filming it.
Okay, look, one thing I always promise to be honest with you guys, and I will admit when I am wrong. The front-facing camera on the phone, not decent stability, horrible stability. Holy crap. Like, I watch it over and over again and it's just a joke. So, pro tip, not a pro tip, basic tip, rookie tip, any moron with eyeballs tip. Don't walk and vlog if you're using your phone. You've probably figured that out by now.
Another advantage of shooting on the phone is that it's kind of a rainy morning out here at Caffeine and Octane, and I've gotten sprinkled on a few times. I had to hide the Canon under my shirt so that it didn't get too wet. I don't have to worry about that with my iPhone 10 because it's not going to be affected by the weather. So I could be out here vlogging in the mist and the rain, and it's not really going to matter, which is a big advantage if you're trying to create content for YouTube. You're not limited by what Mother Nature throws at you. As you become more comfortable using your camera phone, think about what the next step is. Think about apps like Filmic Pro that allow you to not only control the phone manually and use the camera with manual settings, but they also allow you to shoot at the iPhone's maximum data rate. Now, the advantage of shooting at the phone's maximum data rate is that it allows you to do a lot more color correction in post, and you would be surprised what the iPhone is capable of, especially in visual and audio when you are working with it in post-production with an app like Filmic Pro. It's really windy right now as well, so we'll see how well the iPhone is kind of handling that wind noise despite the fact that I'm just recording on a standard microphone.
Remember that whole thing about phones are optimized to pick up voices? Well, you saw that some wind noise really threw the iPhone's microphone for a loop. It was a little bit windy that morning in addition to some rain, and you can hear the microphone trying to make sense of what I was trying to do with the background noise, the wind noise, and just a lot of the ambient noise in general, and it started to sound a little bit robotic at times.
So if you're using something like Filmic Pro, it's going to allow you to manipulate your footage more carefully in post-production. I use Adobe Premiere Pro for post-production, but if you're on a budget, DaVinci Resolve, the free bundle you can get with that, is excellent and probably the best free editing software out there. So consider picking that up if money is an issue. Premiere Pro is not expensive, but hey, a lot of people starting out YouTube, they don't got a dime to spare. DaVinci Resolve is probably the best thing you can use. Now, one of the things that's really helping me out today is the fact that it's cloudy. And when it's cloudy, the lighting is really nice and you don't have to worry about the sun nearly as much. So if you're thinking, oh, Jax is a liar, he didn't shoot all this footage on an iPhone. No, I really did. And professionals can probably tell that, but the lighting is really helping me out today because it was raining this morning and the clouds are really helping to diffuse that light so I'm not blown out. And you can see how pasty I really am in real life, where you can see like my organs through my skin and stuff like that. True facts. Now let's take a look at some footage I shot both in the native iPhone app and in Filmic Pro for B-roll around Caffeine and Octane on May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, 2019. of the things you want to think about if you're shooting on the native app is when you tap, you are autofocusing and auto-exposing at the same time. And if you lock that, you're locking both. So you can't move forward or backwards too much. Phones don't have a super shallow depth of field, but you will get out of focus quickly if you are close up on something. So you want to keep that in mind if you're locking that exposure and focus. Rain's starting to come down again, which makes me glad that I'm shooting on an iPhone. Another thing to consider, if you are moving around while you are shooting B-roll on something like an iPhone, you need to hold still and you need to be aware that the iPhone has a stupid little stabilizer that's supposed to help smooth out your footage. But in reality, if you move too much, it just makes it look jello-y and weird. It's another reason that you should shoot at the 4K 60 or the 1080 120 frame rates. It will really help you smooth out that shake, which looks super unprofessional if you're trying to make nice looking footage. Personally, I recommend shooting at 4K 60. The main reason is at 4K, if you're on a 1080 timeline and editing, you can actually move the frame around because you have more than you need in terms of image. There is a ton of oil on the ground. I don't know if you can see that, but it is a lot of oil. It's like a car exploded out here. New Lincoln Navigator, I'm a fan. And I'm not entirely sure what's with all the oil all over the ground everywhere for this show. It's not normally like this, but someone must have a car that's leaking everything, like all of the fluids. So I like to shoot in 4K 60, and there's a couple reasons why. One, if you're on a 1080 timeline, 4K gives you a lot more real estate to work with. You can move the image around to get the proper framing that you want. Secondly, 60 is enough that you can slow the image down to hopefully smooth out some of that camera shake, but it still gives you that crispy 4K footage. If you are moving a lot, especially because the iPhone has that stupid stabilizer in the sensor, I would recommend shooting at 1080 120 to really try to smooth that footage down. Just keep in mind you don't have as much data to work with. When you're shooting video, if you want to have the most data possible, make sure you're shooting in the iPhone's high efficiency video codec. It will put the most data into the file as possible so that later you have a little more wiggle room when you're working with it.
Well, as you can see, the footage is a little bit bouncy. And by a little bit bouncy, I mean it's like I'm driving over the surface of the moon on a tricycle made out of granite. It's not good. It's not good. But that's okay because you don't have to walk around while you're filming, and it would have been a lot better. I wasn't really thinking about how much the iPhone would be jittering. But let me jump into the computer and show you some stuff with the color graded editing I did on the footage from the native app, and then as well as the footage from Filmic Pro, the app I mentioned in the video. So let's take a quick peek inside Adobe Premiere Pro to see how you could better edit that footage so that it looks a little more cinematic and not quite so home video-y. Home video-y? Home video-y? Is that like a thing? Home video-y? Can't really think of another way to say it. Garbage? Here we are with the native iPhone footage, and you see the shot of the Mercedes-Benz front end. If I turn off the color correction layer like this, then that's what the shot looks like after it was corrected at its most basic level, which if I turn it off here, that's what the original footage looked like coming out of the iPhone. So by correcting it in the Lumetri color panel over here, you can see the before and then the after. You can see the adjustments that I made on the right side. iPhone footage tends to be very warm, so I cooled it down quite a bit, and then I adjusted the shadows and the whites to my liking. I left the saturation mostly alone. I actually dialed it back because I feel like the footage is too saturated coming out of the phone. Then I added a LUT like this to give the image a little more character. If you would like to see where I got this particular LUT, it's by Daniel Schiffer, and I'll link to his channel down below. So this shows you what's possible with the native iPhone footage. Here's a shot of the Ferrari if I remove the LUT and then remove the adjustments. You can see how warm the footage was originally. But if I add it back in, turn the LUT back on, the image looks a little more cinematic. I softened the blacks using the LUT provided by Daniel Schiffer. All right, now by comparison, this is the footage from Filmic Pro. So I'm using the iPhone, I'm shooting in 1080 at 60 frames here because I wanted to be able to slow it down. One thing to note about all of this footage is that none of it was stabilized in post. So this is all handheld with no stability added by Premiere Pro. A lot of people add warp stabilizer and stuff like that if you want to iron out the footage, but I didn't for the purpose of these tutorials. So here's a shot of the Mercedes front end with all of the layers on. But if I turn off the cinematic bars, I turn off the LUT, and I turn off the adjustments made to the image, you see how flat the image is and how warm the image is. Also, I cheated and I added a sun flare. You might notice right here when I turn that off. I added a little fake sun flare because I noticed the warmth coming in from the edge and I thought it would make it look a little fancier, a little more cinematic. So if I slowly build it back up, I turn on my initial lumetri adjustments where I cooled down the footage. Then I turn back on the LUT by Daniel Schiffer, which really gives it a nice kind of orange and teal look, very subtle. I dialed down the opacity. You can see that here in the creative tab. And when you dial down the intensity, here's the LUT layer, and I have it dialed down to 65. So I dial that down, I'll add the bars back in to crop in on the image, and then I'll add back in the sun flare. And that is the completed image. And here's what it looks like as it plays back. This image also has a fake sun flare. You can see this layer right here of the fake sun flare, as does this image. Now the quality of this image, if you really look at this tire from the monster truck, the color data in the footage coming out of a phone is phenomenal. Filmic Pro does an amazing job of packing a lot of data into the file so that you can extract it and color correct it as much as possible.
Now, I apologize for the shaky footage, but other than that, what the iPhone can accomplish, as well as the Pixel and some other high-end phones like the Samsung Galaxy, is very impressive. And it just goes to show you that you don't need super fancy equipment to start a YouTube channel or to even make decent YouTube videos. Some of my old videos, one that I did at Stance Nation or Slammed Enough, I don't know, one of them, I'll link it in the description. I can't remember. I shot entirely on my phone because I might have forgotten my camera battery. Maybe. Anyway, I shot it entirely on my phone and it turned out, not half bad, and the footage held up pretty well, especially using Filmic Pro. So if you found value in this video or you think about implementing any of these tips, please consider leaving a like and a comment on the video, or if you'd like me to cover any other topics or tips so that you can shoot better car and motorcycle videos, let me know in the comments and I'll do what I can to cover them. Thanks as always for watching. Ride safe, drive safe, and I'll catch you in the next video, and I'll definitely do a tour. I'm intentionally not showing you around because I think that'd be a lot of fun. It's been a long time that I've lived in my old house and we're very happy to have moved. Also, I need to do a video about the Corvette because it's been a while and it's not working. It's not working. Yeah, that's its own issue. I'll cover that next time. Catch you in the next one. Peace.